All right, Eric, this one's a privilege for me, so I want to thank you right on the top of the things for taking the time to sit down and chat a little bit.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast, Mike.
Yeah, the reason that it's such a privilege for me is because actually, way back in the early days of this journey, I stumbled onto your podcast as well as a few others that really helped me to not only introduce myself to Stoicism, but understand it and apply it to my life. So, for putting the time in to do that work, I want to say thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. It's been quite a journey for me as well, and the podcast for me actually has been a big growing uh, opportunity. It not just that the opportunities it's given me, but people often ask me like, so how do you actually implement stoicism, in your daily lives and those type of things? And I say, well, I kind of cheat. And they kind of look at me funny, like, how do you cheat? Do you implant it in your brain or something? And I'm like, well, because I make a podcast on this, it's the thing that's always on my mind. Like, I'm working on it, at least a new episode every week. And it takes me time to sit down and write it, figure out what it is I'm going to do about it, dive deep into these topics. And so, because I'm consistently thinking about it on a daily basis, it just becomes a natural part of how I think about the world. And so, in a way, I kind of cheated, in that it's kind of like how a teacher of a subject becomes really, really good because they are constantly thinking about how to explain the subject to their students, and they're doing it year after year. And so, for me, it's been 7.5 years that I've been working on this. So, yeah,
Body of work itself to watch the progression of it, I think is a really beautiful thing because you're actually living the whole concept, and that to me, that's one of the most important parts of not just having a podcast that you put out to help people, but actually trying to progress in life is to truly live the concepts that you encounter. And as you get to know them, you actually get the opportunity to put them up to the test and see how they work out in real life situations.
yeah. And I think the biggest thing, like I tell everybody when they're trying to make a change in their life, is that it's not the giant grand gestures, it's the everyday little decisions that you make. And, the consistency I think is key on that. And, making sure that when an opportunity comes up where you need to practice it, you don't avoid it, but that you lean into it. And that can be as small as, having a disagreement with your partner, your kids, or a friend. And rather than being reactive, choosing to be compassionate and take the time to slow down and listen and put your ego aside, you know, and that's the more that you do that, the better you get at doing that. And I think that that's, probably one of the biggest things that Stoicism has taught me. And that's why, one of my favorite books is by Ryan Holiday, The Obstacle is the Way, and like, excuse me, like Marcus Aurelius said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Like the way you get good at something is by doing that something, and you're going to suck at it, something terrible at the beginning, and that's okay. Be okay with sucking at something for a long time. I don't know if you're an Ira Glass fan from This American Life, but he has a great quote where he talks about how oftentimes our taste and our discernment about something is really good. Like we can read something and go, ah, yeah, that makes sense. I totally get that. Or when we're working on a creative endeavor, like being a musician. So we talked about that before we started recording. Our taste in music is really good. We know what is really good, and we know why music is good. We know why this guitar solo is far superior to this other one. Even though yes, it's a matter of taste, but you can listen to somebody's technique and know they're really good. And then you look at your own ability and you're like, man, I suck at this. But your taste is good. And because your taste is good, you know how bad you are at it. And that sometimes can be incredibly frustrating. And, he talks about how you just got to push your way through it. You just got to keep pushing through. And over time, if you're making a little bit of improvement every single time, you're going to get better. It's just naturally, unless you truly have no talent for it and you truly don't have good taste or discernment about what is good and what is not, and I think that with life, it's very much the same way as any creative endeavor, that it's that consistency. It's that understanding of that's where I want to be and this is where I am. And realizing that difference and being able to see reality for what it is, I think can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think it's when we look at that big picture is where we all tend to get stuck. Because I actually, a long time ago, wrote an article about this idea of you're walking the trail of life and then you come up to this mountain and you've got to climb the mountain in order to get to the other side, being the big picture. But when you reach in the backpack, you realize you forgot your climbing rope. So you stay right there at the plateau of the mountain and you build a life there. You find comfort in it, but you're always looking up and you're always wishing and wondering what was on the other side. But then you get to that stage where you feel like because you've got this life established here at the base of the mountain, you can't pick it up. You can't go and find out. You can't explore it. And you always kind of let that linger in the back of your head until one day finally you realize it's never about the rope and it's never about the routes that I've made because the things that are of value to me within my journey, I can put them on my back. I can take them with me. It's just about actually taking that very first step.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk ourselves out of so many things. I think, I always joke around that sometimes we are our own worst enemies when it comes to actually making progress because of the beliefs that we hold about ourselves. And for me, Stoicism has been the tool for me to improve the way that I think and to think more clearly. Growing up, I always felt like I was reasonably smart, and I felt like I can understand things and pick things up pretty well, but I didn't feel like I was good at thinking about thinking and being able to think critically. It's like, I'd hear about philosophy and I'd be like, oh, I'm just not smart enough for that. It just doesn't make sense to me or whatever. And so I think I had a philosophy class when I was in college. I honestly don't remember much about it. But then when I stumbled onto Stoicism, it was just like that was the first time that I read about a philosophy that went where something really clicked. And it was like, oh, wait a second. That actually makes sense. It's like, okay, it's logical. It's not just some psychological theory. It's much more practical and something where I can actually see that I can implement these things in my life and be able to understand that it's your thinking that creates your emotions, which creates the actions that you take, because, all actions are driven by emotion in some way or another. And then based upon those actions, you get your results. I mean, it's a very simple process, but that understanding that how you think about the things that happen to you determines how you feel about those things. And that was the first time that anybody kind of explained that, like, you really can start to separate this and get that objectivity. Notice where your thinking is, and then start to go, oh, because I was thinking this, that's why I had these feelings. Okay, that made a bit more sense. And then you can start changing that thinking.
And I feel like as you go through that process, though, you actually start to realize that you have to take responsibility for the thoughts, the actions, the behaviors, and every footstep that you make, which, and, makes it very challenging because when you're allowing the idea of fate just puts things in your hands and you're just walking this path on autopilot, there's no responsibility. It's a lot easier. You don't have to own up to the actions that you take. And it's actually thinking back a conversation that I had with my youngest son over at Campfire last summer as we were sitting down in Boonesboro, Kentucky, the night before we were going to the fort. And I was trying to explain to him who Daniel Boone actually was and why he was so important in the American story of evolution. And it was because of that. If you think about the real motivation for him to continue west, was people just got too close to him. He felt like there was no elbow room. And essentially, in our world today, that's almost defined as social anxiety. So that social anxiety kept pushing him forward because he had to take control over those feelings. he had to learn how to adapt and apply those into something that was comfortable for his story, for his journey, and worked in his life. And I think we all have that opportunity if we're willing to start with that simple, basic idea of just accepting responsibility for even the thoughts before they become action.
Yeah. So my last episode is all about the idea of free will and understanding, do we have free will or not? And there are some neuroscience which posits that we may not necessarily have control over the first impulse of things, and the Stoics actually talk about that. They call them impressions. And while you may not have control over the initial flash, the initial, reactive anger that you have about something, initial desire you have towards something, or aversion you have towards something, you can pause and you can choose to either agree with it and follow through with it, or you can veto it, or you can use it to understand it and shape it. So it's an interesting idea that maybe we, do we have free will? Do we not? How responsible are we or not? Um, and it's still a challenging idea. I can't say that I'm conclusively on one side or the other. The Stoics held that circumstances were deterministic, meaning the logos, the grand divine, I don't know what you would call it, intelligence of the universe of why we have something versus nothing. Basically, if you want to think of it as physics, why things happen is deterministic, but that our reaction to those deterministic things is our free will. And yeah, so but I find that you know, even if we aren't the originators of our desires and our impulses and the things that we do, if we're just really habit engines, that we're just a whole bundle of habits that are put together, in order for us to survive. And that's kind of what creates consciousness and all of the action. And so we take, scientists have still shown that we still have that ability to approve of acting on those impulses or vetoing those impulses. At the very minimum, that's where, I think people can really start to take some action. And some of that is, practices like premeditatio malorum, which is like, run through your mind the worst case scenario or run through your mind all the scenarios of something you might, you're struggling with, so that when it does happen, you've started to develop a habit to react differently to it. And, but it takes that initial awareness and that initial thinking through those things in order to prepare for those things. If you just hope that, okay, I understand this, and then when it happens, I'll try to do better. Well, sometimes you might, sometimes you won't. But if you can practice that, and if you can think through it, like, okay, me and my me and my partner are always getting into fights over, certain things. Let me practice that argument in my mind of how I truly want to behave in that, and practice that over and over and over and over and over. Then when you are in that situation, you're kind of used to that situation, so you've already developed a habit to handle it differently.
So I think that really speaks to the gift that we as humans have, which is the power to tell stories.
Yeah.
And with that, we collect as we grow up through experiences, vocabulary that we tell those stories with. But we also have a choice to look at, dissect, and inspect each word in that vocabulary to see if it's really fulfilling us, if it's really serving that story that we're trying to relay or live. And if it's not, then we have that power, that responsibility to ourselves to go out and develop a new set of vocabulary words to push that story along in the way that we, within our hearts, truly feel it's there.
Yeah. And we can at any time observe the stories that we're telling ourselves and change them. So oftentimes, because we make assumptions about somebody's motivation, for example, we may attribute, uh, nefarious motives to somebody over something that they did, and they may be completely ignorant and maybe thought something completely different, but we've assumed that they're doing something, to harm us or to injure us or, whatever. But then when we sometimes we'll get down to the, to the nitty gritty and actually get to the bottom of a story and recognize that, oh, the story we were telling ourselves was very different than what the reality was. But we behaved as if the story were true. And because we were either unaware of the reality or we decided to ignore it. And I think that that's a really important thing. So I always talk about with people like, what story are you telling yourself? Oh, well, so and so didn't text me back. And so they must hate me or, they're avoiding me and make up this whole story. And it's like, then like a few hours later, they get a text back from that person and, they're like, oh, sorry, my phone died and I was or I was at the movie theater or I was at class or who knows what, but we make up all kinds of stories about what other people's actions mean without truly understanding those actions. And so I think, it's a simple example. And I think that we can change that story at any time, but it's something that we have to be consciously aware of and then make a conscious decision about.
Yeah, and that gets back to the principle of being kind with others while being more stern with yourself. Developing that practice is very important to be willing to be understanding, provide, the grace of, hey, I may understand and perceive something one way, but somebody else may not have that exact vocabulary. They're not understanding it the exact same way, or there may be forces at work that neither one of us can see or perceive. So you've got to learn how to navigate that a little bit slower, I feel.
Yeah, I like to use what's called Hanlon's razor, and it goes that don't assume malice when ignorance or stupidity is more likely.
Absolutely. And I see that a lot going through my current struggles with adapting some health changes and having to get one of those CGMs, those continuous glucose monitors, which all of a sudden have become like the hardest thing in the world to find. So, you show up, they say they're there, and then the person in front of you is looking for it too, and they're yelling and screaming. And in reality, it's just a simple issue with the supply chain.
Yeah.
It's not the person's fault that you're yelling at. And by the time you get up to the counter and they're all stressed out and worked up because they just got their head chopped off, it's like, man, I get it. Just let's find another path and we'll all be happy at the end of the day. Things will finally work out one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that, at least for me, I found that as I've grown within Stoicism and my own personal journey, is that um, one of the biggest changes that I had to make, which actually made me much more kind to other people, was learning how to be kind to myself. I used to be much more insecure and wanted people to like me and needed their validation. And when they didn't like me or they disagreed with me, oh my gosh, I would feel awful about myself. And it took me a while to figure that out. And then I went through this space of like, okay, why do I need this validation from these other people? Why do I need them to feel okay about me? And, I was like, that's an interesting question. What is so awful about me? Or what is it that I need their validation for? Then I'm like, oh, because I'm not a very good person. Okay, well, why am I not a very good person? Kind of digging, the five whys, if you will. Like, why am I not a good person? And why would I think that? And then sat with that for a while and I was like, I really don't know why I'm a bad person. I just know that I am. So I sat down and I wrote down everything I didn't like about myself because if I was a bad person, I needed to know why I was a bad person. And everything that was on that list, when I got down and looked at it, I was like, this really isn't all that bad. Here I was thinking it was going to be this terrible thing. I was going to, all these awful things about me that I was going to uncover. And it was like, I couldn't really think of anything that was really all that bad. But for some reason, I felt like I was a bad person. And everything that was on that list were things my friends struggled with. And I still love and care for them. So that was a big step for me of practicing that self acceptance. And the thing is there are things on that list that I didn't really like, but I could at least accept them because they were true. And, like one of the things I used to be a much more selfish person. And so that was on my list. Like I can be really selfish sometimes. Okay. But the nice thing is that when you accept that you can be selfish sometimes, it makes it a lot easier to change that because then when somebody calls you out for being selfish, you know that you can be selfish sometimes. So you can actually go, well, am I being selfish at this moment? And you can actually look at it because you acknowledge that you can be selfish sometimes. And so in that moment, you can go, well, actually, yeah, they're right. I am being a bit selfish in this moment. Or maybe actually you're not. You're not being selfish. You're doing what you think is the right thing to do, and it's not selfish. But until you're aware of that and you accept that you can be selfish, you're never going to notice those times when you are actually being selfish because you don't want to think of yourself as a selfish person. It's very much an ego defense because we don't want to look at all the bad things about ourselves. So that's one of the things I do with some of my coaching clients. I'm like, okay, do this exercise. Write down all the things you don't like about yourself. And first they're like, wait, what? You want me to do what? I'm like, just trust me. And they get done with the exercise, they're like, wow, actually that was enlightening. Like I didn't realize that there were that many things that I didn't really like about myself, but really weren't all that bad. And now I feel a lot better about myself. I'm like, yeah, that's what self acceptance is. It's accepting yourself for exactly who you are.
Yeah, there's two sides to that coin because obviously we have our strengths, the things that we like about ourselves. Those are easy to accept, you know.
Exactly.
That's that comfortable space. The challenge and the real uncomfortable part is looking at finding your weaknesses,
Yeah.
learning how to accept them. But when you do, you start to work with them more. So that term either changes from a weakness to maybe it becomes a strength. But either way, you can navigate back and forth between both sides of the coin. And the cool side note to that is when you come against the storms or the really hard, difficult parts of life, your toolbox is that much more full. You know,
Yeah.
that knife that you may need to chop down a tree and build a shelter, protect yourself from the rain, it's that much easier to use to work with.
Yep. And I find that the more aware you are of it, like I said, it's so much easier to actually deal with it and turn it into that strength. And then it also just takes away a lot of the fear from it. I mean, by looking at it, you're like, that's it? Like that wasn't that bad. Like, and so, but I found that in doing so, then you're also much kinder to yourself because you've accepted all these things about you. And then when you're kinder to yourself and you're more accepting of yourself, you're always much more kinder. You're much kinder and more accepting of other people because you recognize that, oh, they're just unaware of their flaws and they haven't done a very good job of accepting that. It brings a certain kind of wisdom that you recognize, oh, they just haven't gone through this process yet. They're covering up for whatever it is that they don't like about themselves. You know, I mean, for me, it was, like I said, I was insecure and I needed all this validation from other people. If they disagreed with me, then, oh, they don't like me. If they, didn't like my ideas, they think I'm stupid. It was all of these things. And it was just like, no, they just have different opinions than me. Okay, that's okay.
You know, actually, I think you just summed up my experience the other day beautifully because it was actually the first private class that I've given to people that I actually know or interact with on a regular basis. And all day long leading up to the class, I really struggled with it. I'm like, well, what if these people think I sound really stupid? And then I got to look at them, every couple days or whatever. And that's just going to be weird and awkward. And then I got there and, I set up the room, put my little fire together and everything. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm turning off the lights. It's going to be dark. So the only thing you're really going to hear and see is my voice. And they know it's me, but I don't know who's actually showing up for this. So it takes a lot of that complex train of thought that's kind of trying to get you to spin your gears and stay stuck in the mud. You can look and find something almost humorous to help you dry that surface up and continue to walk. Because I'll tell you, there was a couple of minutes even where it was like, do I really want to do this? There was really a lot of self-doubt there for a minute, and then you show up and you go, yeah, I've I've got this thing that I'm supposed to do. These people are expecting, and we're gonna do it. And then you get in there and you laugh about it. You're like, oh yeah, the room's dark, so we're good.
Yeah. And the thing is that we oftentimes project onto other people a lot of our own fears about things. So we project their opinion of us from our point of view. We assume that this is what they think of us. And that was when I did that exercise, I noticed that things kind of fell into two different categories, mainly two categories. And they were one, the things that I truly didn't like about myself, and two, the things that I thought other people didn't like about me. Which isn't to be discounted because we often project those things onto others. But rather than putting that blame on other people, I had to look at those things and go, now, is that really something that I don't like about myself? Or is it something that that I'm okay with, but I'm afraid that other people won't accept, And so it's an interesting filter. And that's why I really like the way that the Stoics think about things. And you learn how Socrates thinks about things. And it's always this questioning of, okay, what is the real meaning behind that? And you're always going a little bit deeper and questioning things a bit more. And that was a skill that's taken me some time to actually develop. And I'm still not as good at it as I'd like to be, but I'm definitely much better than I was. And I can dig into things a little more deeply than I used to. And so for me, Stoicism was kind of that gateway philosophy drug into, some of the deeper philosophies and being able to think about things in a more um, structured way, clarify my thoughts from my emotions, uh, and really just kind of add a more logical layer and an objective layer into a lot of things in life. So rather than reacting emotionally to everything, I could look at things with a little bit of distance and be like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. And then making a choice rather than being reactive. And that gives a lot of power, not just in you're not as emotionally reactive, but it also gives you the power to be more compassionate towards other people because you can take a step back and go, okay, whoa, they're really react over. I think they're overreacting here, but why are they overreacting here? Okay, let me walk through this a little bit without my emotions getting in the way, but just my logic and my rationality and it gives you that ability to not be reactive to their emotions. And so that gives you the space to be able to, think through the situation, see how you can handle it a little bit better.
I think actually that is one of the most important principles. As we're talking, I'm thinking back to sitting in the truck, that first morning and realizing that it was time to make a shift in my life. But I had yet to find a way to start that journey. And luckily stumbled onto some good folks like yourself that had already established a voice and a pattern, a way to help people think about things, which is what we've done a lot of here is inspire a lot of thought. But I want to go back to that truck. And there's a lot of people that are sitting in that position where they're ready to change whatever it is that may be struggling them with for them, but they haven't found the voice. They haven't found the way to get there. And I, because we're podcasters, we've got this unique opportunity to kind of show our progression. I want to talk a little bit about some ideas that would help them to start their journey.
Sure. I think probably the first and most powerful thing, and this is, when people ask me like, okay, what is Stoicism? What is it really all about? You, the first and most powerful thing to understand is what you actually have control over. And, simply put, you have control over the way that you think about things, the choices you make, and the actions you take. That's it. Everything else, including your body, what other people think, um, all the external events that happen to you, are outside of your control. And you can choose how you respond to them. Like if you get sick, you break a bone, whatever it is, you didn't want that. It just happened, but you choose how you respond to those things. With your emotions, it's very much the same way. Like I said, the Stoics talk about how the idea of impression is an ascent, like we talked about before. You may not control the first feeling that you have about a situation, but you can always pause and change what you make that mean. So, for example, say that you have to go and sing in front of 100 people. Now, for some people, that's really exciting. They get the butterflies and they're like, "Whoo, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be fun." Other people, they get the butterflies and they're like, "Oh my God, this is terrifying." The actual feeling in their body is exactly the same. It's that nervous butterfly sensation. But for one person, the story they tell themselves is this is going to be so exciting. This is going to be so much fun. I get to share my gift. I get to go out there and perform. It's going to be a blast. The other person is absolutely terrified because, like, oh my gosh, what if I fail? What if, they're going through all of those type of things and they're nervous and anxious about it. But the sensation is pretty much exactly the same. So the stories that we tell ourselves have immense power, and the perspectives that we have on things have incredible power over the way that we view the world and the way that we interact in the world and the way that we react to everything that happens in the world. So that's why the Stoics were very big on understanding, what you control and what you can't. I would say the next big thing is that they were very big on living what they call a life of virtue. And for them, they had four cardinal virtues, which are wisdom, justice, meaning how you treat other people, courage, and temperance, which is also self discipline, moderation. And the reason why those things are so important is that they are actually very much uh, self reinforcing. So, in order to have wisdom, you have to be courageous enough to become self aware. Because knowing what you don't know, admitting you are dumb, trying to understand your failures and really go deep and to know yourself takes courage. And that's how you gain wisdom is that you learn things and you have lived experiences and combine those two things. It takes courage to practice justice because stepping up and treating other people fairly, even if they don't treat you fairly, that takes courage because you try to do the right thing no matter what. Just because somebody else does something bad to you doesn't mean you do something bad to them because that makes you no better than them. And that was a very stoic idea of like you treat others fairly even if they don't treat you well. And then it takes but you have to have wisdom mixed with courage to be able to practice justice and then to actually kind of put the bow around all of those things to make them work. You have to have the self-discipline to try to become wise. You have to have self-discipline to understand and practice courage, and the same self-discipline to uh, step up and practice justice. And so, they kind of all help support each other, kind of like, four legs on a stool. And I think that for me, it was a very well thought out thing. And it deviated a little bit from like what Aristotle and Plato taught. Aristotle was like, well, fame and beauty are also, virtues. And the Stoics were like, yeah, but you don't need those to be happy. You can be ugly, you can you can be poor, but if you live those four virtues, you can be a happy person. And I think that was where they broke from things. They stripped out all of the non-essential things and were like, here's a very core philosophy that is very easy to understand, and it's just a bunch of principles. There are no rules. There's no like, this is what it takes to be a good Stoic. This is just, live these principles and you'll live a happier life.
And I really think actually, to build on that is just simply taking a few minutes throughout the course of your day to sit in stillness and really think about it because that's how you develop these things. It's not just words on a piece of paper. You can read something over and over again so you memorize it, but it's putting it into action. So just sitting with it in stillness or meditation is a very, very important part of the process. You do the study and you do the research to learn these ideas and these techniques, but then you got to employ them in your life. And I think you start small with just simply the stillness, and then you step up a little bit and get on the trail, whether it's metaphorically, just walking through life and executing these things that you learn and you develop and you feel comfortable with, or actually, an actual wooded trail and do the hiking and just see how they actually play out, utilizing the power of observation.
Yeah, I know for me, there was an exercise that I did about 3 years ago where I did a 60-minute meditation for 60 days in a row. And it was very challenging. And I got the idea from Naval Ravikant. And doing that exercise was very, very interesting because the idea was you just you sit down, you sit in quiet, and you focus on your breathing. And then when you notice that you're not focusing on your breathing anymore, you notice what thought is going on. You become aware of that thought, and then you let it go, and then you focus back on your breathing. And you do that for 60 minutes. And the first 30, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, it's kind of like fireworks. Your brain is just like going off and thinking about all kinds of things. And oftentimes, stuff will come up that you haven't thought about in decades, but you'll just have this, it feels like random thoughts. But what it does is that while you're doing that exercise, and it's frustrating because you're like, oh, I can't focus on my breathing. I keep my mind keeps wandering all the time. But that's the whole point, is that you notice where your mind wanders to, you notice the thought, and then you slowly, gently bring it back. So what that does is it teaches you observation, and it teaches you focus. And I found a number of things happened after doing that exercise. Number one was that my base level of anxiety kind of dropped by a substantial amount. It just felt more relaxed. And Naval has a theory on that when you do an exercise like that, it allows your unconscious and your subconscious mind to work through a lot of the backlog of things that you never really dealt with. It's just kind of like when you just let your brain be bored and just kind of do its thing, then it starts kind of unwinding a lot of stuff that's there. And that number two, again, because you're doing the focusing and the observing, you're training your brain and you're rewiring your brain in a different way. And so from that point on, I find that I'm much better able to be aware of the thoughts that I'm thinking, especially in the moment. Like when I feel something, like, ooh, I'm feeling a little off today. What's going on behind this? I'm much more consciously aware of the thoughts that are happening. And so that's because of that 60 days of training like that really made that difference. It kind of burned it in pretty tight. So that's one exercise I recommend to anybody. And it's not easy, but it's incredibly powerful. And the thing is, all you're really doing is just sitting there and just, you know, watch, observing, and then refocusing, observing, refocusing. And that's all you do.
A lot of people will hear that and they'll come up with the idea that there's no way I'm going to sit still for 60 minutes, because I haven't even done five. And to me, it's a matter of just keeping the important part is the principle, the practice. But the time frame of it, or whether or not you physically move or whatever, that's all you need to yourself. So allowing yourself the grace, because I remember when I think back to my first days meditating and the stigmas that I had around it, exactly that. It's such a formal, disciplined practice that I spent an hour arguing with my counselor about it. And then I went and I picked up my crossbow afterward and I started shooting. And I'm like, okay, this is meditation for me.
Hmm.
And then taking it out on the trails and really taking it from there and just taking off with it. And the drastic changes in my life that it's opened the door to, I think never would have happened had I not found that way to make it relate to myself.
Yeah. For me, my other form of meditation is cycling. So, and I've missed that here. I moved to Amsterdam about a year and a half ago, and I don't have my racing bike here.
Mhm.
And I really miss that. So I'm hoping I'll get one coming up here soon. Um, I'm kind of in a weird transition of I may have to go back to the States soon, and so I don't necessarily want to buy a new bike and then have to figure out how to get rid of it. So, but but yeah, after I got divorced 20 years ago, that was my Zen time. That was my meditation. Just put miles on the road, and I put 40, 50 miles on in an evening on my way home from work, and that was my way of dealing with all the stress that was going on in my life. And I would either because I couldn't do anything else besides ride. I was either focusing on the road, I was focusing on the scenery, or my mind would kind of wander and go off and do its thing. You know, but I found that that was an incredible meditation practice as well, and it was kind of what kept me sane through that really rough time.
Yeah, I can relate. It was definitely a lot of hiking that got me through the back half of that. And, for all of us, whatever that actual action is that gets you through it, it's going to be different. And that's cool. accept it, and just embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we put too many expectations on ourselves of how things are supposed to be. And that's why, like I said, the meditation that I recommend to people is just, you know, focus on your breathing. And when you notice you're not, notice what the thought was, and then refocus on your breathing. That's it. That's your meditation. That's all you have to do. Whatever your timer is, that's you set that timer and you just do that until your timer rings, and then you're done. And I think that removes a lot of the anxiety about, oh, am I doing it right? It's like, yeah, did you observe? Did you refocus? You're doing it right.
See, I love the way this conversation's flowed because that's a perfect way to end it. We started with something good, we built it up, and now we're leaving you with a simple point to practice and to accept. Eric, thank you so much for this time, my friend. Before I let you go, you got to let people know where they can get a hold of the new book, get a hold of the podcast, work with you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, you can find my website at stoic.coffee. The name of the podcast is the Stoic Coffee Break, and I'm on all the major platforms. Obviously, Spotify and Apple are probably where I get most of my listeners from. And on my webpage, there are links to a couple of different websites where you're able to purchase the book. It's also available on Audible, and it's just Stoicism 101. And I did the narration for that. So if you enjoy listening to my podcast or my voice, then you get a treat. And I get to read my book to you.
Beautiful. We definitely got to do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on here.
Absolutely.